Cohort, we'll be using Visual Studio 2017 as our IDE, our Integrated Development Environment. There are two versions, one running on Windows PC and one running on Macintosh. So we have Visual Studio 2017 and Visual Studio for the Mac. On the Windows side, Visual Studio 2017 can be used to produce Windows desktop apps, as well as using Xamarin to create Android and iOS apps. However, on the iOS side, you do need to have a Macintosh within your network that you can send your project to have it built on a Mac. That's a Apple licensing requirement. Though now you can actually test it in a simulator on Windows, you will need a Mac. Visual Studio for Mac, however, you cannot build Windows applications, but it's really, I think, ideal for creating Android and, of course, iOS, since you need to have it built on a Mac. It's easy to produce your project on a Mac. So in summary then, for the CIS 162 and 262 portions of this cohort, you will need to do your work in Visual Studio 2017 on a Windows PC. Now you can have a build partition on a Mac with Windows running and do this work on a Mac, but it needs to be within Windows 10. When it comes time to work on CS 165 DC, of course you can do that in Visual Studio 2017. But again, if you want to build iOS apps, you will need a Mac in your network. And that Mac will also need to be running Xcode. I'll get more into the Xamarin setup as we get closer to that material. My preferred approach, though, is to do Xamarin on a Mac using Visual Studio for Mac. And there it's very easy to do both Android and iOS. So for now, make sure you have installed Visual Studio 2017 on a Windows operating system machine. And I'm going to walk you through those steps very quickly now. In a browser, navigate to visualstudio.microsoft.com. Come to this site here. You'll see that right now Visual Studio 2019 is in beta. You can do a preview of that. We're though going to use Visual Studio 2017, which is the current release. And if you come down here to Visual Studio IDE, download for Windows, you'll see there are three versions: Community, Professional, and Enterprise. These all kind of look and act the same, but Professional and Enterprise have different licensing requirements, and Enterprise is really aimed at working in an environment where you are sharing code with the development team. For our purposes, Community is the right environment to work in, and as a bonus, it's free. So we'll be able to do everything you need to do for this class in Community 2017. So I'm going to click that. I would encourage you to do the survey. I've already done the survey, so I'm going to say no thanks. And it will automatically download here. When it is done downloading, you can double click it to launch the installer. And you'll go through a series of dialogues. I'm going to say continue. During the installation, you will be asked which components you want to install. So for CIS 162 AD, you definitely have to have the .NET Desktop and Development components installed, which gives you access to C# and Windows Forms and WPF, which we might look at later on the semester. We're going to focus on Windows Forms. But since you're also taking CIS 165 DC and CIS 262 AD, the advanced C# class, you will want to install a bunch of other components. So I'd recommend installing the Universal Windows Platform Development. This will be important when you get into creating Xamarin stuff. Also with Xamarin, you want to make sure that you have the mobile development with .NET installed. And I'd go ahead and install the game development with Unity. We'll try to look at Unity at the very end of the semester. I would also install the Visual Studio extension, the .NET Core cross-platform development. You will need that for CS 262. along with the ASP.NET web development and the Azure development. And I would also include the data storage and processing. If you think you might want to go on and learn something like Python, you can install that here. You don't have to. You can always come back later and install any of these items as needed just by going to the installer on your desktop or in your start menu and choosing Modify. On the right-hand side will be a listing of all the stuff that you have chosen to install. And then you would click Modify or Install, and it'll run the installer. So you'll find a listing of these items in Canvas. In the Modules area, there is a document called Installing Visual Studio Community Edition. And I list there in written form the steps and the things you'd want to include. So again, you want to include the Universal Windows Platform development, the .NET desktop development, ASP.NET and web development, Azure development, mobile development with .NET, the .NET Core cross-platform, data storage and processing, and I would suggest also doing the game development with Unity, especially if that's an interest of yours. This is a large installation. It's going to take a while, so I would get it started and then go grab a cup of coffee, grab some dinner. It's going to probably take maybe a couple hours, depending on the speed of your machine. And once installed, you'll need to reboot your computer.